Hi, Sandra Alexander here, speech therapist, mother of a child with autism. And we have another webinar today about stimulus control. Sounds a bit ominous, but we're going to learn about it and take the ominosity, if that's a word, away, hopefully. So stimulus control, what is it? So every behavior we learn is the result of stimulus control. So when a behavior becomes either more likely or less likely to occur, it's because of a history of a consequence that takes place provided by a stimulus in the environment. So, for example, emitting the tack green is only reinforced in the presence of the color green and not the another color like red. Another example is telling dirty jokes and being punished if you do that in front of your grandma. That makes you less likely to tell dirty jokes in front of your grandma. So you see the stimulus control there at work. So here are types of stimuli, and here's a picture that we are familiar with as parents of children with autism. Anyways, discriminative stimulus, or SD, extinction stimulus, and punishment stimulus. So discriminative stimulus, or SD, as I will keep using that, SD, signals that a response is likely to be reinforced. For example, when conducting your child's programming, if history repeats itself, we know when we see 2 plus 2 that it equals 4. In contrast, we know that 3 plus 2 does not equal 4. Maybe a child receives verbal praise if they get this answer correct. Maybe your child, for example, looks forward to breakfast, and they know that if mom and dad says, please set the table, that means breakfast is coming soon. So being asked to set the table is inherently reinforcing because they're going to get to eat. So there's your SD, or discriminative stimulus. An extinction stimulus, if you know the word extinction, it's a stimulus that helps have a behavior occur less and less. It suppresses a bad behavior, for example, or a behavior that's undesirable. We haven't discussed extinction stimulus too much yet. It's also used when something that was once reinforced is no longer reinforced. So maybe your child, let's say, has tantrum to get their way when they were younger, and you'd go over and say, don't cry, it's okay, don't worry. But when they're older, you don't do that so much. So you're actually extinguishing that stimulus and to get rid of the crying. So if it's a really challenging behavior and you ignore it, see if that works, but you may really need to consult with your behavioral consultant to know when to use this, and certainly using it or going to punishment stimulus, which will be only used more or less as a last resort. So you should be very careful when you're using these things. You should try all the positive stuff first. And if none of that's working, then you may have to go to this other. So a punishment stimulus signals that a response is likely to be punished, so you shouldn't do it, and really suppresses behavior, or should. So there are a variety of punishments that can take place that we'll discuss later. But an everyday example of punishment would be, can the presence of a particular person who delivers a verbal reprimand to the child who isn't listening, raising your voice, that kind of thing. What are some other places we might see stimulus control? Well, advertising, of course. A container for a wrapper of a favorite food is a stimulus control for asking for that food. That could reinforce. So discrimination training. So in the presence of a different stimuli, individuals may behave differently, and that would be the strong stimulus control. And generalization. In the presence of different stimuli, individuals may behave similarly, but still do the behavior. And there's also weak stimulus control. So for example, there are traffic signals that uses, for different groups of people normally stop for a red light. Discrimination training is the application of consequences in the presence of certain stimuli and not in others. To further understand this, we'll look in terms of discrimination again and generalization. So discrimination, the effects of the effect consequences are particular to a specific stimuli or behaving differently in the presence of different stimuli. So we know, for example, that a stimulus control would be absent or weak if we know when it's absent, because the behavior that we expect to see in the presence of an SD doesn't occur. Compound discriminative stimulus, two discriminative stimuli need to be present to get a response. So if a child uses the bathroom, they do not automatically go brush their teeth because a toothbrush is there. They probably would need to get, prompted with time to brush your teeth for that to happen. For stimulus control to develop, you need to target the behavior. The target behavior is reinforced in the presence of the stimulus, instruction or visual cue, etc. The target behavior is not reinforced in the presence of S delta, and undesired behavior is not reinforced in the presence of the discrete stimulus or SD. For example, the target behavior being reinforced in the presence of an SD, the student gains access to a preferred item when he touches the cat, when he hears the word cat. The target behavior is not reinforced in the presence of S delta, and also no preferred item when the student touches the cat when he hears the word dog. An undesired behavior is not reinforced in the presence of the desired stimulus, the SD. No preferred item when the student touches the dog when he hears the word cat, for example. So for stimulus control to develop, and I'm going to move this, there's a stimulus antecedent before behavior, response, and the reinforcement of the consequence. So the behavior needs to be in the child's repertoire. They can do the thing. The child needs to be able to model simple behaviors, and the child needs to be able to functionally point to pictures. So many factors play a role as to whether or not a stimulus control can develop. And it depends on what behavior you're also trying to elicit, and the cues you are using, and also what prerequisite skills are needed. So the child should previously be able to, let's say, point if you want them to point to a picture. The child needs to be able to model behaviors, and they need to be able to, let's say, imitate clapping, functionally point. They need to know, may need to know how to tie his shoe. If you say tie your shoe, they should be able to tie their shoe. Tips for stimulus control include being consistent. Consequences should be provided in the presence of the stimulus, and stimulus salience. So providing the consequence in the presence of the stimulus and not in its absence. Stimulus selection should be appropriate. Also, the stimulus salience should be evident, meaning that the stimulus should be apparent to the learner. Okay. Physical capabilities, prerequisite skills are always making sure that your learner can do prerequisite skills like pointing, like paying attention. If they can't pay attention, they can't do any of this stuff yet. You work on that first. So why is this important? Antecedent stimuli can be used to evoke or suppress a behavior, and it helps promote generalization. And you can detect unintended stimulus control. So because the antecedent stimuli can be used to evoke or suppress a behavior. So if we go back to the traffic light, if it weren't for a red light, cars wouldn't know when to stop. It also helps promote generalization of behavioral treatment effects to new environments and allows others to carry on interventions or teaching. This is important because it allows other people working with your child to be consistent and use the same stimulus. Now, unintended stimulus control happens sometimes. We don't even know that we're doing this sometimes when we're assisting our kids. We may engage in behaviors that have unintended consequences. We might glare in another direction, we might tap our toe, or our physical presence in certain contexts may serve as a stimulus control. There are instances where a client or a child will work better with one parent than the other, because let's say the parent did a better job of reinforcing or pairing themselves with something that the child really wants. And they know they can get, let's say a child will figure out, they know they can get away with certain things with one parent rather than the other. For example, some children may learn that I'm a little more strict on them taking off their shoes when they come in the house, but with dad, they're not. So they might not take off their shoes with dad, but they see me and they'll take off their shoes. And they figured that out. That's a stimulus control. And that's not always intended. So, so provided some instances that aren't represented, they don't represent all the kind of stimulus controls or unintended controls that could happen. And they don't represent super challenging behavior, but you can see how this could really feed into some things that you know the impact of unintended stimulus control and how it positively and negatively can impact what you're teaching. So once again, I'm Sandra Alexander. Thank you for listening to this webinar. Have a great day.